Recently, there has been an onslaught of videos about the fantasy book YouTube space all reading the same books. Quite a few different channels have made videos just talking about how the same around 17 or even 10 different book series keep turning up across the fantasy YouTube sphere. And I never planned on talking about this. However, I keep getting tagged in the damn videos, so okay, let's talk a little bit about it. To my knowledge, because I haven't really been following it that closely, I do think this started when Nick Reads Fantasy made a video called Everyone's Top 10 Fantasy List is the Same. And in that, he just kind of goes over how a lot of people's top 10 reads are very similar to one another. And I think that's completely makes sense. To be fair, there's a reason why a lot of these books are the most popular books that are being passed around and recommended amongst readers. They're usually pretty good. They're the type of books where there's a lot of overlap. A lot of people have read them because they are so popular. And there is some talk about it kind of being this echo chamber going back and forth. And if lots of people say it's their favorite, more people will pick it up. And is going to keep going. One of the things I've not really seen mentioned is that I do think a lot of these most popular books are often the series that we grow up with. I think this is very much a generational thing, and by generation, I'm talking a big chunk of people. I'm not talking about a single generation. I mean a very broad spectrum of ages often grow up with the same sorts of books, or they come back to reading fantasy, reading books. Like one of the biggest by far, of course, is Brandon Sanderson. He turns up on a ton of different top 10 lists. And I have talked with so many readers who said Mistborn was their introduction or reintroduction to reading adult fantasy again after they took a long break. Now, I know I'm going to get comments if I don't say it. Yes, Brandon Sanderson is a modern example of this, but I do think that the point stands, and you can just kind of swap that out for a lot of classic fantasy book series that just turn up in a lot of these lists, like Wheel of Time or Song of Ice and Fire, which I'm just about to mention, but I need to mention it here because I know it's going to come up if I don't. And we have series like A Wheel of Time, and of course A Song of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin, huge behemoths in this space that I think just have been foundational series for a lot of adults' fantasy reading. So it's going to be in their top 10 probably forever. And this is why I think it's also a generational thing. If we go 50 years into the future, even 20, maybe even 30 years into the future, I do think that this trend might change because people will come up and have started their reading journeys in different areas and different spaces, reading perhaps some of the books that we're reading that are new right now. I was also recently tagged in a video from Shelley Swearingen, where she did mention the fact that there was over 100,000 traditionally published fantasy books in a year in the last year or something like that. But the problem with that point is that the marketing isn't put towards all 100,000 of those books. Often we have the huge series that build up a lot of hype, and traditionally published authors, a lot of them are kind of left to do their own marketing apart from where the publisher knows that the book's going to do well, or they believe there's a new one that could do really, really well, and they push a lot of the marketing budget towards these larger fish in the publishing world. Which of course means that, yes, 100,000 books were published, but if we don't see 95,000 of them, it's very difficult to kind of bring more attention to those books. And it just statistically makes it much less likely for them to turn up in top 10 lists, especially if they're newer releases as well. But I do think that Shelley's video is where we're starting to conflate top 10 lists with everybody's recommendation and what they're reading. The difference between their top 10s, which are going to be the books that they grew up with, that they perhaps have a bit of rose-tinted glasses with, type situation where because it was such a fundamental, foundational read for them, is forever going to be in their favorites. I also want to add that a lot of us have the same foundational books or very similar foundational books, because when we are looking for book recommendations and we haven't read that much, we go to the classics. We go to the ones that are most recommended and most talked about, the ones that are very clear and at the front of bookshops, or the ones that are mentioned all the time online, like the point of this video. So it makes sense that a lot of our foundational books are the books that kind of brought us into the genre when we were younger, or brought us back to reading after a break, as I've heard over and over that is the case for a lot of readers. They're very similar. And those top 10 lists, similarities are being conflated with all that's being talked about, which is a point that I would probably push more back against, because I do think that there's a lot of really interesting videos coming from a bunch of different channels in the fantasy book space that are talking about brand new books or just gems that they want to bring more eyes to because they just picked up on a whim and really, really enjoyed it. It's just that those videos don't get the same amount of attention as top 10 lists because it's super popular. It's one of those big search term trends. I think sometimes we think of the book community as the general public when it's really not. I think the general public is much wider and they don't follow book accounts that often. But if they're looking for a recommendation, the first thing they're going to search is top 10 fantasy books search. So, which is why so many top 10 lists are so popular and do very well view-wise. For example, even if we take Shelley's video where she tagged a bunch of different top 10 lists that she watched, and that's kind of where she made the foundation of her argument that we are all reading the same sorts of books. However, if you click on the channels that she mentioned and the videos that she watched, if you go to their channels and just look at the more up-to-date videos, a lot of them are reading the books that I hadn't heard of. I was looking through the most recent videos for a couple of the channels, and they had some really interesting books that weren't on my radar beforehand. So yes, there's a lot of views in top 10 lists, but that is not all that's being viewed or talked about in the bookish space. It's just what does well because it's a trending term. And absolutely no hate to these videos. I just kind of want to point out that Nick's original video, which again, I think was the starting point of this conversation, was about top 10s, and it kind of derailed to everything that we talk about on YouTube. So I just kind of want to make that distinction, and that's kind of why I'm pointing to the examples, because Shelley did have them linked. Again, no hate towards them. I just wanted to point that out. Another point that came up a couple times is the idea that if you include popular books in your videos, the videos are more likely to perform well. If only it was that easy. I really wish I could say that that was true and I could just use that strategy for videos to perform well, but it just doesn't work like that. And I'm kind of glad it doesn't, because that would obviously taint the whole ecosystem, in my opinion, just touting the exact same books all the time. In fact, I often find the opposite. If you're the type of channel that makes videos or posts on any of the social medias about books that are lesser known, and people pick one of those up and they try it, or even if they just see you talking about it and think it sounds interesting, I do think people are more likely to follow you if you are one of these people that are bringing them brand new books that they're not finding anywhere else. The issue with that is that sometimes it's a little bit harder to make a compelling, clickable video if it's something brand new. If you make two videos and one is a review of Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, and you also make a second video that's Spiegelbarf by Jerry Stevenson, a book review, people are more likely to click on Mistborn. Just neither video will perform that well, but because Mistborn is a known name, you will get people who are interested in just that and will click on it. Again, terrible titles, terrible thumbnails, but people are more likely to click on something they are familiar with. But if you call Jerry Stevenson's, I think that was the name, video something like, "This underrated fantasy gem is a must read," is a lot more likely to perform well. People want to find new fantasy. They want to find books that they haven't heard of before, but they're not going to click on a video if you just have the book title or the author's name or something really basic that just isn't that compelling. Whereas more people are likely to click on something like a Brandon Sanderson video because they like Brandon Sanderson. They already enjoy his work. Again, that doesn't make it a really easy formula to just make a ton of Brandon Sanderson videos and suddenly your channel will do great. I've had tons of videos with Brandon Sanderson being the main focus and the video has flopped. If we go to my top 3 performing videos, the first one is of course a top 10, because top 10s always do really, really well. We've been over this. The second is 10 fantasy trends we need more of, which is just me looking at some things I'd like to see more of in fantasy. And again, I think this appeals to a wider audience because people are just interested in things that are new and fresh and interesting. And I do think that the fact that that's my second highest really speaks to that. And my third most popular video is 5 underhyped fantasy books. I don't really want to go poking around on other people's channels and comparing their stuff. That's why I'm looking at my own here. But it just kind of shows that there's definitely a lot of interest in finding new fantasy books and the fact that videos will perform well. So if you do create videos and reviews on any platform. Don't be afraid to read and promote new and interesting fantasy books or indie stuff. But if you do, making it more interesting and more compelling rather than just throwing a title and an author name in people's face, you're more likely to get clicks if you sell it on the ideas or why this book is interesting. I really don't think it's that deep or complicated. If you go to 15 different ice cream shops and all of them sell vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, and maybe 7 other new flavors that you hadn't heard of that have some overlap with some of the others, it's because it's popular. I don't think it's going to cause a big issue in the ice cream eating space and lots of complaints that the ice cream world is stagnating and we're not getting new flavors. It just happens to be that these are really popular flavors right now. And again, this is something that can change with time. I do think a lot of the most popular books are turning up in all these lists are just what's doing really well currently or did really well and people grew up with them, and it just means so much to these people who are creating these lists. There's also a point that came up that I thought was a little bit strange, and it could be that it's just not something that I've seen, but to my knowledge, this doesn't exist. There is no secret club or cult in the fantasy book space. I can't believe I have to say this. And no, I've not been coerced to say this because otherwise I'll be sacrificed under a blood moon. There's genuinely not a cult. It was this idea that there's a cool kids club that you have to read the popular books to be included into. And I think the point that came up was like collaboration videos and live streams and such, and discords. Most of these are all open. I don't know anyone that has a private Discord. I think there's some author groups and such that kind of have a invite only Discord, but for the most part channels are all open. I have a Discord that's completely open and anyone can join. And book clubs was another thing that came up. Again, my book club is completely open, and a lot of other people's are as well, so I'm not sure where this idea is really coming from. Perhaps with live streams and collaborations, but usually those come around because you create connections with other people who also make videos. And yes, occasionally that will spark because you have a shared interest in a book. That doesn't mean you need to read and enjoy all the popular books to be a part of that side of the community. I've been on a ton of different live streams and collaboration projects where I've disagreed with other people on certain books and our opinions on them. In fact, I can't think of anyone in the book space that I agree with 100% of the time. It just doesn't really happen. And one of the reasons why I'm bringing this cult idea up, other than it kind of being a wee bit funny, is the fact that I don't like the idea that someone feels like they have to enjoy popular fantasy books. If you do dislike a popular fantasy book, it makes no difference. You can still interact with the community, make friends, and chat about books. It's really not that deep. I know a ton of people who really dislike a lot of the popular books. Like Sanderson, again, probably one of the biggest popular modern day authors, if not the biggest, and so common among the YouTube space right now. I know a lot of people that hate Mistborn because they think it feels very young and they just can't get into it. And yes, of course, you're going to get the extreme random people on the internet, but usually they are faceless accounts that don't really interact with the community. They just come on to shout at people who disagree with them. For the most part, what I've found is the communities are really compassionate and a lot of them are very fair, and you can talk about why you disliked a book and they talk about why they liked it, and it just makes an interesting dialogue, and perhaps you pick up things that you missed in the book or vice versa. I'm going to say it again, but it's true. It's just not that deep. It's just books at the end of the day. But I just wanted to mention that because I don't want anyone to be put off from interacting because they disliked a book. I also think that the book guide did a really good job of covering this topic. He kind of went into it with a lot more thought than I have. I'm just going to sit down and ramble at you, but I recommend checking out his video if you want someone who clearly knows what they're doing and actually sat and thought about this and did research. But yeah, that's kind of it. I much prefer making videos about books and just kind of talking about the ones I enjoy or didn't like that much, or hyping up some lesser known books, or talking about a super popular book that I enjoyed. But I kept on getting tagged in these videos. So I felt like I had to just talk about it a wee bit because I do think that sometimes it can be taken a little bit too seriously. And at the end of the day, it's just random people posting, hey, I read this is what I thought. And that's kind of it. There's really not that much more to it than that. Anyway, the next video should be a wrap-up video talking about some books that I've been reading recently. And on top of that, I have a really exciting announcement that I'm going to share at the end of the month that I have been sitting on since summer. So super exciting stuff coming up that I'm really looking forward to finally being able to share. Thank you very much for watching. Outro. Yeah, it's okay. I told them that the cult doesn't exist. Yeah, they'll believe it. It's fine. Oh, sit still.